Mars had always been the kind of place you sent people you didn't like. It wasn't so much a punishment as it was a bad joke with a sadistic punchline. Underneath the rust-colored surface, a colony thrived, if you could call scraping by on recycled air and dehydrated potatoes thriving. Jackson Thorne, engineer extraordinaire and reluctant comedian of the colony, was elbow-deep in a mass of wires and circuits that preferred misbehaving to cooperating. "Piece of junk," he muttered, yanking a particularly stubborn cable. "I swear, if it's not one thing, it's your life support system going on strike." "Careful, Jax," came a voice from behind. It was Sierra, the colony's resident optimist, a rare specimen more elusive than water on this rock. "Insult it too much and maybe it'll short out for good." Jax chuckled, the sound as dry as Mars' surface. "If it does, do me a favor and make sure my obituary reads, 'Death by disgruntled machinery.'" Sierra snorted, kicking a stray bolt across the floor. "I'll add survived by a colony of equally disgruntled neighbors." The two of them made quite the team. Jax, with his sarcastic wit and general disdain for authority, and Sierra, who could light up a room if they ever found enough power for actual lights. Their banter was a salve in a world where every day was just a new shade of red. Jax tightened the last bolt and wiped his brow with the back of his hand. "There. Should hold for now. Until it decides to crap out again," Sierra added helpfully. "Naturally," Jax agreed. "Just part of the charm of living in a tin can buried in Martian dirt." Just as Jax was about to suggest a break, where the break involved sitting still and imagining they had coffee, a low hum vibrated through the floor. It was a noise that none of the manuals had mentioned because manuals assumed things worked. "Hear that?" Sierra froze, her optimism taking a backseat to caution. "I hear it," Jax replied, already moving towards the control panel. His fingers danced over the buttons with the grace of someone who'd spent 1,000 hours trying to keep the colony from imploding. The screen flickered, spat out some static, then reluctantly displayed a series of red alerts. "Well, I'll be damned," Jax muttered. "System's gone and developed a death wish." Or, Sierra suggested, peering over his shoulder, "it's got a new friend." "Aliens?" Jax snorted. "Right, and I'm the king of Mars." "You have been pulling off regal quite well," Sierra shot back. "But I'm serious, look at this." She pointed at a section of the screen where data scrolled like a bad parody of a stock exchange ticker. Jax squinted. "Interference patterns hard enough to make my eyes bleed," he muttered. "This doesn't look like our usual tech gremlins." A new voice interrupted. "I know that look, Jackson. That's your what the hell have I gotten myself into face." It was Callum, the colony's chief they-love-to-hate leader. His authority was as questionable as the colony's food supply, but he'd somehow become the man in charge. Probably because no one else wanted the headaches. "Callum," Jax greeted, sarcasm dripping like oil from a leaky engine, "came to enjoy our delightful malfunction festival." Callum crossed his arms, his patience thinner than Mars' atmosphere. "I came because we're getting reports from all over. Systems blinking out, communications fried." "Aliens," Sierra suggested again, unhelpfully cheerful. "If you say aliens one more time," Callum warned, "I'm going to make you write a report on why you're wrong." Sierra smiled sweetly. "I'd rather write about why I'm right." Jax rubbed his temples. "All right, let's say it is aliens. What are they doing?" "Playing havoc with our systems for fun." Or, Sierra leaned forward conspiratorially, "They're testing us." Callum sighed, the weight of leadership heavy on his squared shoulders. "Testing or not, we need solutions, not theories." "Fine," Jax agreed, cracking his knuckles. "Let's figure out how to tell our uninvited guests to bugger off." He pulled up a chair, gestured for Sierra and Callum to join him. "If they're messing with us, maybe we can return the favor." "Jax," Callum said slowly, "please tell me you have a plan." "Oh, I've got a plan," Jax assured him with a grin that wasn't reassuring at all. "I've got plans all the way down." Sierra leaned in, eyes glinting with interest. "Do your plans include surviving?" "Most of them." Jax winked. "The rest are just for the hell of it." As they huddled over the console, the colony hummed around them. oblivious to the fact that its residents were planning a showdown with the unknown. Because if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was picking fights with things they didn't understand. Jackson Thorne leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, eyeing the motley crew gathered around the control panel with the kind of skepticism usually reserved for toothpaste commercials and politicians. Callum had done his best to assemble a team of experts, which, as far as Jax was concerned, meant people who could potentially screw things up just as badly as he could. First, there was Lyra Corvin, the colony's historian. On Mars, a historian was about as useful as a chocolate teapot, but Lyra had a knack for digging up interesting dirt on both ancient civilizations and her fellow colonists. She stood with her nose buried in a tablet, likely searching for any mention of alien invasions in the Martian archives. Then there was Fen Rylos, the nanotech specialist. Fen looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and Jax could sympathize with that. Fen was the kind of guy who could make a joke about nanobots and actually mean it. If anyone could unravel this technological mess, it was him. "All right, folks," Jax began, clapping his hands together with the enthusiasm of a man about to explain that, yes, the toilets were backed up again. "We've got a situation. Our systems are throwing tantrums, and the initial theory is aliens." "Aliens?" Fen echoed, raising an eyebrow as if Jax had just suggested they all strip naked and dance in the airlock. "Really? That's what we're going with." "Don't look at me," Jax replied. "It was Sierra's idea. I'm just the guy keeping the lights on." Lyra looked up from her tablet, a bemused expression on her face. "You know, there are ancient legends about Martian civilizations. They say they had technology far beyond ours." Jax snorted. "If they were so advanced, you'd think they could have left a manual or two behind. Something more useful than how to build a pyramid. Or at least some decent coffee beans," Sierra chimed in, always ready with her relentless optimism. "Imagine the tourism potential." "Yeah, visit Mars, come for the dust, stay for the coffee," Jax muttered. "Let's focus, people." "Fen, you got anything on these interference patterns? They're itching my brain, and not in a fun way." Fen leaned over the console, fingers tapping a rhythm only he seemed to understand. "These patterns aren't random. They're too structured, too deliberate. It's almost like they're rewriting something." "Rewriting what?" Callum asked, rubbing his temples like a man trying to push his headache back inside his skull. "Our systems, our data. Hell, maybe even our history," Fen said, his voice tinged with a mix of excitement and dread. Jax exchanged a look with Sierra. "Great. So not only are we running on borrowed time and recycled air, but now we're facing an existential digital erasure. Just another day on Mars." Lyra straightened, eyes gleaming. "If it's ancient tech, there might be a way to communicate with it, or at least understand what it wants. If it's trying to erase us, that seems pretty clear," Jax said. "It wants us gone, or it wants us to stop meddling," Sierra suggested. "Maybe it sees us as a threat." "Us? A threat?" Jax laughed, though the sound lacked any real humor. "We're about as threatening as a wet sponge, but let's say you're right. How do we show we're not here to piss in their Cheerios?" Fen scratched his chin, a gesture that spoke volumes about his uncertainty. "We need to access the nanotech itself. If it's embedded in the systems, there's a chance we can isolate a part and study it." Callum nodded, though his expression was still one of a man who'd been told he had to eat his vegetables before dessert. "Do it. And for the love of everything, don't make it worse." "No promises," Jax said, pushing his chair back and standing. "Lyra, Fen, you're with me. Sierra, keep the optimism flowing. Callum, keep the place from falling apart." As they moved toward the maintenance bay, Jax couldn't help but wonder if this was how the universe planned to kill them off. Death by alien technology and history lessons. He'd always imagined going out in a much less ironic fashion. The maintenance bay was quieter than usual, which was to say it was only slightly less chaotic than a toddler's birthday party. Jax waved at the chaos, gesturing for Fen and Lyra to begin their work. Fen immediately set to work, his fingers moving with the precision of a man who'd done this 1,000 times before, which, Given their history with breakdowns, he probably had. Lyra hovered nearby, her tablet in hand, eyes darting between Fenn's work and the scattered tools and parts. You know, if this is alien tech, it might be responding to something specific we did. Jax raised an eyebrow. Like what? Breathing too loudly in its sacred airspace. Maybe we activated something, Lyra mused. A trigger or a beacon. Well, whatever it is, I just hope it's not the exterminate all humans button, Jax said. That would really ruin our weekend plans. Fenn snorted, the sound muffled by his concentration. You're assuming it would need a button for that. More likely it just thinks we're pests. Great, now we're galactic cockroaches, Jax replied. There's a title to be proud of. As the minutes ticked by, Fenn finally isolated a small section of circuitry and held it up like a trophy. Got it. This is definitely not human in origin. Jax leaned in, peering at the tiny, intricate designs etched into the surface. Looks like a microchip had a love child with a Picasso painting. Lyra examined it closely. This might be a message or a program designed to interact with us. Or it's just an alien's grocery list, Jax quipped. But let's pretend it's important. Fenn carefully connected the chip to a scanner, and the machine hummed to life, processing the data with a series of beeps and flashes. Everyone held their breath, half expecting the entire colony to explode in a fit of cosmic rage. Instead, the screen lit up with a jumble of symbols and characters, scrolling across with dizzying speed. It was a language, but one that defied easy translation, each character a puzzle within a riddle wrapped in an enigma. Lyra's brow furrowed in concentration. This is incredible. It's a language, but not like anything I've ever seen. It's almost like it's alive. Alive and possibly homicidal, Jax added. Any chance we can talk to it before it decides to delete us? Working on it, Fenn said, his voice tight with focus. If I can decode even a part of this, we might be able to send a response or at least stop whatever it's doing. Let's hope they're not too sensitive about late replies, Jax said. Last thing we need is an intergalactic misunderstanding. Minutes stretched into hours as Fenn and Lyra worked tirelessly, the room filled with the low murmur of their conversation and the constant hum of machinery. Jax paced back and forth, occasionally checking in with Callum and Sierra, whose optimism remained as annoyingly unyielding as ever. Finally, Fenn let out a triumphant sigh. Got something. It's basic, but I think it's asking us a question. Like, why are you here, or what's your favorite color? Jax asked, leaning over the console. Fenn shook his head. More like, what are you building here, or what's your intent? Well, that's easy, Jax said. We're building a colony and our intent is to not die. Think they'll buy it? Lyra chuckled. Only one way to find out. Let's send a response. Fenn quickly typed a message, his fingers flying over the keyboard. The tension in the room was palpable as they watched the message blink on the screen, a simple declaration of peaceful intent and a request for dialogue. Now we wait, Jax said, leaning back with a sigh. Hope they're more patient than we are. Or we could throw a welcome party, Sierra suggested over the comms, her voice crackling with static. Show them we're friendly. Sure, Jax replied. We'll just whip up some hors d'oeuvres and hope they like dehydrated potatoes. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness, each second a reminder of the precariousness of their situation. Jax kept his eyes on the screen, willing it to respond with something other than an ominous silence. Then finally, the screen flickered, and new symbols appeared, followed by a series of beeps that sounded almost like laughter. Is it laughing at us? Jax asked, incredulous. Maybe, Fenn said with a shrug. Or it's just translating what we said into something we can understand. The symbols resolved into a message, and for a moment Jax thought he might be dreaming. We understand. Continue your existence. We are watching. Fenn read aloud, his voice filled with a mix of relief and unease. Well, that's ominous, Jax said. But I'll take it over immediate annihilation. Lyra smiled, though it was tinged with a hint of caution. Seems like they're willing to let us stay, for now. Great, Jax said, clapping his hands together. "Let's celebrate by not dying horribly today. Drinks at my place tonight if we can find any." Sierra's voice came through the comms, full of cheer. "I'll bring the optimism." Jax rolled his eyes, but there was no real annoyance there. "Sure, bring that. And the plans for what we're going to do when they change their minds." For now, they had a reprieve. The alien presence was a shadow, watching and waiting, but at least they had managed to make contact. And so, with a sense of cautious optimism, not that Jax would ever admit to such a thing, they continued their work under the watchful eye of the unknown. Mars, it seemed, was full of surprises, and if there was one thing Jax had learned, it was that surprises rarely meant anything good. But for now, they'd take what they could get and keep moving forward, one dehydrated potato at a time. The maintenance bay had seen better days, not that anyone could remember them. Jackson Thorne looked around, noting the familiar clutter of tools and half-finished projects that seemed to multiply like rabbits when no one was watching. If chaos had a headquarters, it would be right here on Mars. "All right," Jax said, clapping his hands in a futile attempt to get everyone's attention. "We've got an alien nanotech trying to erase us from the universe's hard drive. Suggestions?" Fen Rylos glanced up from his spot on the floor, surrounded by a tangle of wires and circuits. "Maybe we introduce it to the concept of procrastination. It seems to work wonders for our deadlines. Or we could just unplug the whole thing and hope it takes the hint," Sierra offered, her optimism undeterred by the dire circumstances. "Kind of like rebooting a very stubborn computer. Except this computer might decide to reboot us instead," Jax pointed out. "And not in a fun way." Lyra Corvin, who had been diligently going through the colony's historical archives on her tablet, let out a groan. "Bad news. It looks like the tech is already erasing our records. We're losing critical data faster than you can say galactic oversight." Callum, who had been slouched with the demeanor of a man whose cat just died, straightened. "What do you mean critical data?" "I mean everything," Lyra replied, stabbing at her tablet as if it had personally offended her. "Birth records, colony formation details, even this year's potato yield. It's all going. Our history is being turned into a blank page." Jax ran a hand over his face, feeling the grit and desperation settle into his bones. "Great. As if our lives weren't enough of a punchline already, now our past is joining in on the joke." Fen leaned back on his heels, staring thoughtfully at the mess in front of him. "We need to counteract this somehow. The tech is in our systems. If we can create a digital firewall, maybe we can stop it from erasing more data." "And how do you propose we do that?" Callum asked, skepticism dripping from his words. "With duct tape and a prayer." "Hey, I've seen miracles worked with less," Fen said with a shrug. "But seriously, we need to isolate the nanotech and keep it from accessing our mainframe." "Someone's been brushing up on their technical jargon," Jax said dryly. "Okay, Fen, you and Lyra work on that. Sierra, find a way to keep the life support running." "I'd rather not suffocate while we're trying to save our DVD." "On it," Sierra said, already heading toward the life support control panel, which had a personality more volatile than a soap opera villain. As the team dispersed to their tasks, Jax lingered a moment longer, staring at the screen that had delivered the alien message. The risk of being watched was a constant presence now, an uninvited houseguest lounging in the back of his mind. "Watch all you want," he muttered under his breath. "We're not going anywhere." The next few hours passed in a flurry of frantic activity. Fen and Lyra worked side by side, their collaboration a ballet of tech jargon and historical tidbits. If there was a data apocalypse, at least they'd go out nerding it up to the max. "So, any idea why these ancient aliens would be interested in wiping our history?" Fen asked, not looking up from his work. Lyra shrugged, her fingers flying over her tablet. "Could be anything. Maybe they don't want us repeating their mistakes. Or maybe they just have a thing against poorly stored data." Jax, who was hovering nearby like an overworked ghost, chimed in. "Or maybe they think we're writing a bad soap opera and can't stand the plot lines." You mean they have taste? Fen quipped, a rare grin tugging at his lips. They were interrupted by Sierra, who came barreling back into the room, her expression one of determined exasperation. Life supports holding, but it's not exactly thrilled with the situation. I had to remind it we're not all ready to become martyrs just yet. Good job, Jack said. Keep it breathing for now. As they continued their work, it became clear that the task was more complicated than they had anticipated. Each time they thought they had a handle on isolating the nanotech, it slipped through their fingers like a particularly slippery bar of soap. This thing's like a greased pig, Fen grumbled. Just when you think you've got it, it wriggles away. Sounds like my last 5 relationships, Jax replied, trying to lift the mood with humor that was more like a lead balloon. Lyra was quiet for a moment, studying her tablet with the intensity of someone trying to decipher a particularly tricky crossword. What if we try to outsmart it? Use its own logic against it. Go on, Fen said, intrigued despite himself. We could create fake records, Lyra suggested. Flood the system with so much false data that it can't tell what's real and what's not. Like a digital camouflage. Callum, who was overseeing the chaos with all the enthusiasm of a man forced to referee a playground brawl, nodded slowly. That might just work. If we can buy enough time to reinforce our systems, we might keep it at bay. Then let's do it, Jack said, feeling a spark of hope amidst the gloom. Time to play dirty. The team sprang into action, feverishly crafting a deluge of fictitious data. Imaginary birth records, fabricated historical events, even a few fake potato crop yields. It was a bizarre exercise in creativity, but one they embraced with gusto. As they worked, the tension in the room began to ease, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and shared purpose. Even Sierra's unyielding optimism seemed to infect the others, and they found themselves laughing, if a bit hysterically, at the absurdity of their predicament. Who knew lying through our teeth could be so therapeutic? Sierra said with a grin. It's the Martian way, Jax replied, amused despite himself. Adapt, improvise, and hope for the best. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they stepped back to admire their handiwork. The system was awash with enough fake data to choke a mainframe, and the alien interference had slowed to a crawl like a snail caught in molasses. That should do it, Fen said, a note of triumph in his voice. At least for now. Good, Jack said, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. Now we just have to hope they don't have a truth serum. The screen blinked, and for a moment they all held their breath. Then slowly a new message began to scroll across the display, the alien symbols resolving into something they could actually read. Deception detected. Clever but futile. Continue your existence. We are watching. Jax let out a low whistle. Well, at least they appreciate our creativity. What now? We keep at it, Callum said, his determination renewed. They may be watching, but we're not going down without a fight. And by fight he means more lies, Sierra added with a smirk. I can live with that. As the team returned to their tasks, the sense of urgency and desperation that had gripped them began to fade, replaced by a fierce resolve. They were a small colony on a barren planet, facing an alien force that could erase them with a keystroke, but they were human, stubborn, resourceful, and more than a little irreverent. In the grand scheme of things, they were insignificant, a mote of dust in the vastness of space. But here now, on this dusty red planet, they would fight to exist, to carve out their own story, even if they had to fabricate half of it. And so they continued, under the watchful eyes of their silent observers, each day a testament to their resilience, each fabricated record a defiant middle finger raised to the cosmos. If the universe wanted a battle, it would get one, and they would give it everything they had. Mars, after all, was not a place for the faint of heart. Jackson Thorne leaned back against the cold metal wall of the maintenance bay, checking his reflection in a cracked piece of plexiglass. He looked like he'd just lost a brawl with a sandstorm, which, metaphorically speaking, he had. The alien nanotech was proving to be a more stubborn adversary than a tax collector with a vendetta. Fen, how's our fake data holding up? Jax called over the hum of failing machinery. Like a birthday cake in a rainstorm, Finn replied from beneath a mess of wires. Looks good for about 5 seconds, then it all starts slipping away. Lyra, who was peering at her tablet as if it were a puzzle she could solve with sheer willpower, sighed dramatically. We're on borrowed time here. If this keeps up, we'll be down to sharing ghost stories since all our real data will be history, pun intended. Sierra bounded into the bay, her buoyancy as misplaced as a puppy in a funeral. I've got good news and bad news. Good news, the life support's still chugging along. Bad news, it now has an attitude worse than an ex with a vendetta. So, good news is we're alive, and bad news is we're potentially more alive than we want to be, Callum quipped, his sarcasm as dry as the Martian dust outside. Jackson nodded, accepting the minor victory even as the walls of their predicament seemed to close in. Well, at least we won't suffocate while we're being digitally lobotomized. Small mercies. Their false data scheme was working sort of. It bought them time, like a cheap umbrella warding off a hurricane. However, the alien tech was evolving, learning, and Jax could almost feel it mocking them from whatever invisible dimension it operated in. What's our next step, boss? Sierra asked, her optimism sharply at odds with the scowl on Jax's face. We need to figure out who's behind this alien tech, Jax said, rubbing his temples as if he could massage the stress away. It's not just some rogue program, there's intelligence behind it. Lyra nodded. Yeah, we've got a puppet master playing a game of galactic chess, and we're the pawns. So who's pulling the strings? Probably someone with a grudge against potatoes, Finn muttered as he twisted a screwdriver in a way that suggested he was imagining it was the nanotech's neck. The lights flickered ominously, a not-so-subtle reminder that the power grid was as reliable as a politician's promise. The colony was teetering on the brink, and the uneasy silence that followed each blackout was louder than any alarm could be. Jax grimaced. Power's gonna go any minute at this rate. We need to rally the colonists before this turns into some dystopian nightmare where we're all fighting over the last potato chip. Callum raised an eyebrow. Rally them with what exactly? Hope and prayer. More like desperation and a shared love of not dying, Jax replied dryly. Let's move, people. We've got a colony to save and apparently no time to do it. As they trooped towards the main assembly hall, the atmosphere was more electric than the failing power grid. Word had spread about the data erasure, and the colonists were gathered in a motley crowd, their faces a mix of anxiety and impatience. What's the plan, Jax? A voice called from the back. We counting on more imaginary data, or do we get to take a swing at these damn aliens? Jax stepped up onto a crate, his makeshift podium for the anxious crowd. Listen up. We've got alien nanotech erasing our history faster than a teenager's embarrassing search history. But we also know it's not operating on its own. He paused, letting the weight of the situation settle. This is controlled by something or someone, and if we can find out who, maybe we can stop them from turning our colony into a blank slate. And how do we do that? Another colonist asked, sounding as skeptical as a banker offered a free lunch. Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady. We need to dive deeper into the archives. The aliens might be erasing things, but they can't destroy everything instantly. We need every bit of information we can salvage. And we need to prepare for a potential power failure, Fenn added, looking uncharacteristically serious. If the grid goes down, we're in deep trouble. As grumblings rippled through the crowd, Jax held up a hand for silence. We need to work together. Fenn, Lyra, and I will focus on isolating the source. The rest of you start conserving resources and prepping for worst-case scenarios. No point pretending we're not in a tight spot. Sierra, ever the beacon of misplaced cheer, added, Don't worry, folks. If all else fails, I'll throw us a goodbye party with recycled air and dehydrated tater chips. The crack elicited a few chuckles, albeit nervous ones. But it was enough to ease the tension, however slightly. The colonists dispersed with a mix of resolve and resignation, leaving Jax and his team to shoulder the burden of the unknown. Back in their makeshift command center, Jax stared at the blinking screens like they were crystal balls revealing a future he wasn't sure he wanted to see. "Fen, any luck isolating that nanotech signal?" he asked, already knowing the answer would make him want to bang his head against the nearest metal surface. "About as much luck as finding a cat in a Martian sandstorm," Fen replied, frustration simmering beneath his words. "It's like this thing is everywhere and nowhere at once. I swear it's doing this just to mess with us." Lyra was immersed in a labyrinth of data, her fingers flying over the tablet with desperate precision. "I might have something," she said suddenly, her voice tinged with a flicker of hope. "There's a pattern here, repeated access points in the system. It's like someone's trying to communicate, not just erase." Jax leaned closer. "A message." "What kind?" "Beats me," Lyra shrugged, pretending nonchalance. "But it's definitely structured. Could be a backdoor communication, or just a really complicated way of saying we know what you're up to." "We need to decode it," Jax said. "It might give us a clue about who's behind this." "And what if it's another wild goose chase?" Callum asked, his skepticism like a heavy fog hanging over the room. Jax gave him a tight-lipped smile. "Then at least we'll know we're being led around by a clever goose." The hours ticked by with agonizing slowness, each second stretching into eternity as they worked to decrypt the alien message. The air in the bay grew thick with tension and anticipation, a silent countdown to whatever fate awaited them. Finally, Lyra let out a triumphant cry, jabbing her finger at the screen. "Got it. There's a message embedded in the data. It's not good news." Jack steeled himself. "Lay it on me." "It's a warning," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something about a faction, an alien faction testing us. They're using the nanotech to see if we're worth assimilating." "Assimilating sounds like the worst company merger ever," Fen muttered, trying to mask his unease with humor. Sierra frowned, her optimism momentarily dimmed. "So what? We're a lab experiment." "Seems like it," Lyra replied. "And if we fail, they erase us. Neat and tidy." Callum sighed, his expression a mix of disbelief and resignation. "Fantastic. We're not just fighting rogue tech. We're up against aliens with a superiority complex." Jax looked at his team, their faces reflecting the grim humor of their impossible situation. "We're not going down quietly. If they want a test, we'll give them one hell of a show." The lights flickered again, plunging them into brief darkness before the emergency systems kicked in with a reluctant hum. "Looks like time's running out," Fen observed. "We need to get that message out before we lose power entirely." Jax nodded, determination hardening in his gut. "Let's do it. Everyone to your stations. It's time to prove we're more than just a footnote in some alien history book." As the team scrambled into action, the weight of their task settled like a shroud over them. They were fighting for their existence, against an enemy that saw them as little more than an inconvenience. But Jax believed in his team, in their grit, their humor, their stubborn refusal to give in. They might be outmatched, outgunned, and out of time, but they were human. They were fighters, and they were going to give those aliens a reason to remember Mars, even if it killed them. The maintenance bay was buzzing with activity, though buzzing might be too generous a term, more like a desperate scramble with a heavy dose of fear-induced adrenaline. Jackson Thorne stood amidst the chaos, feeling like a conductor of an orchestra that only played the sounds of impending doom. Fen Rylos was hunched over a console, wires spilling around him like an electronic octopus gone haywire. "This thing's more finicky than a cat on a hot tin roof," he muttered, jabbing at the controls. "One wrong move and we'll be singing Cumbaya in the dark." Callum, lounging against the wall with a smirk that could shatter glass, chimed in. "Cumbaya? I'd pay to see that, Fen. Maybe we can charge admission to the aliens when they come to assimilate us." "Sure, Callum," Fen replied without looking up. "And afterward, we can invite them to a potluck. I hear they prefer their humans well done." Jackson, meanwhile, was trying to make sense of the report Sierra had compiled. The life support systems were on the fritz, and the data streams were more jumbled than Fenn's hair on a bad day. This is like trying to solve a puzzle with pieces from 50 different boxes, he grumbled. Sierra, perennially optimistic, attempted a smile that looked more like a grimace. Well, at least we're not bored, right? Besides, it's not every day you get to outsmart alien tech that's hellbent on erasing your existence. Speak for yourself, Jackson replied. I'd kill for a boring day right about now. The lights flickered again, throwing the room into a strobe-lit nightmare. The power grid was about as stable as a caffeine addict on a detox, and every blackout felt like another nail in their collective coffin. Okay, Jackson said, trying to corral his thoughts and his team. We've got a plan, right? Lyra, you're on decoding duty. Fenn, you help her. Sierra, keep an eye on the life support. And Callum raised a hand. I know. Be my usual sarcastic self and provide morale support. Can do, boss. Jackson nodded, ignoring the tightness in his chest that threatened to explode into full-blown panic. If they didn't get a handle on the situation soon, the colony would be toast. Dehydrated, potato-flavored toast. In the corner, Lyra was working her magic, or at least trying to. She squinted at her tablet, fingers flying across the screen like a pianist playing a frantic sonata. I think I've found another layer to the alien message, she announced, though her voice was tinged with annoyance rather than triumph. It's like peeling an onion, only this one makes you cry because it's plotting your demise. Do I want to know what it says? Jackson asked, leaning over her shoulder. Probably not, she replied. But it's basically a test of strength message. They're observing us, seeing if we can adapt. If we fail, they'll erase us and move on like we're yesterday's news. Great, Callum said. So we're starring in a cosmic reality show, and the ratings are tanking. Faltering systems and flickering power aside, Jackson knew they were fighting a losing battle. Still, if they were going to go down, they might as well do it with some semblance of dignity, or at least a sarcastic quip on their lips. Fenn, how's that firewall coming along? Jackson asked, shifting his focus to the tech guru who seemed to thrive on chaos. About as well as you'd expect when your tools are older than your grandma's recipes, Fenn replied, still fiddling with the control panel. But give me a few more minutes. I might just be able to stop this nanotech from turning us into a footnote. We don't have a few minutes, Fenn, Jackson warned. We need that firewall up now if we want to have any chance of salvaging this. All right, Fenn groaned. I'm working as fast as I can. Just keep Callum from telling me his life story, and we might stand a chance. The next few minutes stretched into an eternity of tense silence, broken only by the hum of machinery and the occasional curse from Fenn. Jackson paced like a caged animal, trying to ignore the gnawing doubt in his mind that they were all doomed. Finally, Fenn let out a triumphant grunt. Got it. The firewall's up and I've rerouted some of the power. We've bought ourselves some time. Time is a luxury we can't afford, but I'll take it, Jackson said, allowing himself a brief moment of relief. Don't get too comfortable, Lyra warned, her eyes still glued to the tablet. We've intercepted another message. They're escalating their efforts. Fantastic, Callum said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. What's next? A full-scale invasion. Do we need to start making alien welcome banners? Sierra, who had been monitoring the life support systems, looked up with a frown. We've just lost another module. The system's on life support, literally. If we don't get it back online soon, we won't have to worry about aliens. We'll suffocate long before that. There's always the upside, Callum mused. It'll be nice and quiet around here. Jackson shot him a look that could melt steel. This isn't a joke, Callum. We're hanging by a thread here. I know, Callum said, raising his hands in mock surrender. Just trying to lighten the mood before we all kick the bucket. Jackson took a deep breath, trying to quell the rising panic. All right, we need solutions, not jokes. Lyra, keep working on that message. Sierra, see if you can stabilize the life support. Fenn, I need you to reroute more power. Hack the alien node. Fix the entire colony with a paperclip and some chewing gum. Fenn interrupted, his voice laced with dry humor. I'm on it, boss. As the team scattered to their respective tasks, Jackson couldn't help but feel the weight of their predicament pressing down on him. They were fighting against an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't touch, and worst of all, couldn't outsmart. But they hadn't lost yet. Not while they still had breath in their bodies and fire in their hearts, even if that fire was mostly fueled by desperation and caffeine. The emergency lights flickered, casting ghostly shadows across the maintenance bay. Jackson glanced at the faces of his team, each etched with determination and fatigue. They were battered, bruised, and outmatched, but they weren't beaten. Not yet. "All right, people," Jackson said, his voice steady and firm. "Let's show these aliens what we're made of. We might be down, but we're not out." Not by a long shot. With renewed resolve, the team threw themselves back into the fray, each fighting their own battle against the encroaching darkness. They were a ragtag bunch, held together by grit, guts, and a shared hatred of losing. And in that moment, as the colony teetered on the brink of oblivion, Jackson knew one thing for sure. They'd go down swinging, and they'd make damn sure those aliens remembered their names. The next hours blurred into a frenzy of frantic calculations, desperate repairs, and half-baked plans. They were living on borrowed time, but Jackson was determined to wring every last second out of it, even if their odds were as slim as a politician's spine. "Jax, I've pinpointed another access point," Lyra called out, wiping sweat from her brow as she waved her tablet like a victory flag. "I think it's their main node, but it's heavily encrypted." "Then we crack it," Jackson said, borrowing hope from thin air. "If we can get in, maybe we can shut this thing down for good, or trigger a self-destruct sequence and blow us all to kingdom come," Fenn added, ever the realist. "Details, details," Callum shrugged. "I'm more worried about what happens if we do nothing." The team gathered around the console, a huddled mass of determination and nerves. They worked in feverish silence, the only sounds the rhythmic tapping of keys and the occasional muttered curse. "Got it," Fenn exclaimed, his face lighting up with a rare grin. "We're in, now comes the hard part," Lyra warned, her fingers a blur as she navigated the alien interface. "We need to disable the AI without triggering any failsafes." Jackson watched as the screen filled with alien script, each symbol a reminder of the gulf between them and their unseen adversaries. They were out of their depth, swimming in waters that could swallow them whole. But they were also human, and if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was defying the odds. "Almost there," Lyra said, her voice tense with concentration. Just a few more tweaks and the lights flickered, then died. Darkness enveloped them like a shroud, the silence a suffocating weight. "Damn it," Fenn swore, scrambling for a flashlight. "The power's gone. We're dead in the water." Panic surged through Jackson, an unwelcome guest that threatened to drown him. But he forced it down, clinging to the shreds of their plan like a lifeline. "Stay calm," Jackson ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We've still got backup power. We just need to." A faint hum filled the air, rising to a crescendo as the emergency systems kicked in. Dim, flickering lights bathed the room in an eerie glow, casting long shadows that danced like specters. "Looks like we're not done yet," Callum said, his voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Not by a long shot," Jackson agreed, feeling a spark of hope reignite. "Let's finish this." They worked with renewed urgency, their movements fueled by the knowledge that their time was running out. This was their last chance, their final stand against the impossible, and when the dust settled, Jackson hoped they'd still be standing. If not, at least they'd go down fighting, with a smile on their lips and a curse for their enemies. The maintenance bay was alive with the sound of creativity, or desperation, depending on how you looked at it. Either way, there was a lot of frantic activity, and it all revolved around a single console that had seen better days, much like their odds of survival. "All right, people," Jackson announced, cracking his knuckles with the kind of bravado only someone who's completely out of options can muster. "We've got one last trick up our sleeve, and I'm not talking about Callum's latest bamboozle at poker night." "Hey, I won fair and square," Callum piped up, though his grin suggested otherwise. "You're just mad because you lost your rations." Never gamble with a man who's got a deck up his sleeve, Sierra muttered, eyes glued to the life support system, which was hanging on by the proverbial thread. Speaking of which, are we really about to try communicating with alien tech using a code that predates sliced bread? Well, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade, Fenn quipped, though he looked more like someone contemplating turning lemons into explosives. Or in our case, when life gives you alien nanotech, you hack it with a dead language. Lyra glanced up from her tablet, which was displaying a string of ancient code not seen in centuries. Latin isn't dead, she said with an ironic smirk. It's just resting. Fenn raised an eyebrow. Resting? Right, like our power grid. Only Iors doesn't have the luxury of waking up. Jackson shook his head, trying to keep the group focused. Look, we've got one shot at this. If we can get this nanotech to recognize the code, we might be able to stop it from deleting us out of existence. And if it doesn't? Callum inquired, leaning back in his chair with the kind of casual nonchalance usually reserved for people unaware that their very survival depends on an ancient language and a computer system that reacts like it has mood swings. Then we're back to Plan B, Jackson replied. Which is? Sierra asked, her voice teetering between genuine curiosity and the kind of dread that comes with impending doom. Hope we die quick, Jackson answered deadpan. Lyra gave a dry chuckle. Motivational speeches aren't your strong suit, Jax. Hey, I'm just setting expectations, he said with a shrug. I thrive in chaos, remember. Fenn was hunched over the console, fingers dancing across the keyboard like a concert pianist performing their swan song. Okay, I've linked the code to the main interface. If this works, we'll be able to communicate with the nanotech directly. And if it doesn't, it's been a pleasure suffocating with you all, Callum remarked, earning himself an eye roll from Sierra. The emergency lights flickered once more, casting a strobe-like effect over their faces as they gathered around the console. Each of them was a cocktail of nerves and hope, heavy on the nerves, light on the hope. All right, here goes nothing, Fenn said, pressing a final key with the kind of deliberate care usually reserved for defusing bombs or dealing with feral cats. The console hummed ominously, lines of code scrolling across the screen like cryptic prophecies. Doesn't look like much, Callum observed, peering over Fenn's shoulder. That's the point, Lyra interjected, her eyes darting between the tablet and the console. The less attention we draw, the better. If the nanotech catches on that we're trying to communicate, it might just decide we're not worth the trouble. You mean more than it already has? Sierra asked. Before Lyra could respond, the console beeped, a sharp, sudden noise that made everyone jump. The screen flickered, then settled into an unexpected pattern, an alien script interspersed with the Latin code they'd uploaded. Are we in? Fenn asked, eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and newfound hope. Looks like we've got their attention, Jackson confirmed, feeling as if he just won the cosmic lottery without buying a ticket. Now we just need to convince them we're not worth erasing. How do you sweet-talk a nanotech system? Callum asked, crossing his arms in a gesture of skepticism. Send flowers. Promise not to insult its mother. Simple, Lyra replied, her fingers flying across the tablet. We show it that we can learn, that we're adaptable. Right, Callum said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Because nothing says don't kill us like quoting a dead language. As they worked to create a message, the room was filled with the tense silence of a poker game in its final hand. Each of them knew this was a long shot, but it was the only shot they had. It was do or die, not that Mars offered many alternatives. There, Lyra said finally, hitting the enter key like a gavel. Message sent. The room held its collective breath, eyes locked on the console as it processed the data. It felt like waiting for a judgment from an unseen jury. Only this jury could erase them with a whim. Finally, the console beeped again, displaying a response in the same hybrid script. Well, we're not dead yet, Fenn said, breaking the silence with a voice that was equal parts relief and disbelief. That's a start, Jackson replied, allowing himself a moment of cautious optimism. But we're not out of the woods yet. What's it saying? Sierra asked, peering at the screen as if it held the secrets of the universe. Lyra squinted at the message, translating the alien text with a speed that would make a speed-reading champ proud. It's intrigued. It says we've shown potential, likes us better than it likes our Daker, at least. So what now? Callum asked, ever the cynic. Invite it for tea. Hope it doesn't decide to delete us during small talk. We keep talking, Jackson said, feeling a spark of hope igniting despite the odds. If we can prove we're worth keeping around, maybe we can buy ourselves more time. Not to mention fix the power grid, stabilize life support, and oh yeah, make sure our emergency rations aren't just mashed potato dust, Fenn added with a wry smile. Minor details, Callum shrugged. We've been through worse. Not much worse, Jackson corrected. But it's a start. They continued to work, crafting a dialogue with the alien nanotech that was part negotiation, part survival instinct. It was a delicate dance of wit and desperation, each of them contributing to the conversation in a way that kept the nanotech engaged. Hours passed, the emergency lights their constant companions as the team fought against the clock. They were a ragtag group of survivors, held together by sheer stubbornness and a dash of gallows humor. Okay, Lyra said, breaking the silence as she read another response from the nanotech. It's agreed to stop deleting our data for now. The room erupted into a chorus of tense relief, each of them knowing that for now wasn't a permanent solution but was the best they could hope for. That gives us some breathing room, Jackson said, feeling the weight of their predicament lift slightly. But we need to keep working. If we can stabilize the systems, maybe we can find a more permanent solution. And if not, at least we got a few more days to enjoy the view, Callum quipped, staring out the small porthole at the barren Martian landscape. Always the optimist, Sierra said with a roll of her eyes. Someone's got to be, Callum replied with a grin. Might as well be me. With the immediate threat averted, the team continued their work, each taking on tasks with a renewed sense of purpose. They'd bought themselves some time, and now it was up to them to make the most of it. Let's get to it, Jackson said, his voice firm and resolute. We've got a colony to save, and I'm not about to let some ancient alien tech get the better of us. And with that, they returned to their tasks, each fighting their own battle against the encroaching darkness. They were a ragtag bunch, but they were also human, resilient, irreverent, and unwilling to back down. As they worked, Jackson couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. It was a fragile thing, easily quashed by despair, but it was there nonetheless. They might be outmatched, but they weren't outwitted. Not yet. And if they had anything to say about it, they wouldn't be, no matter what the universe threw their way. The air in the maintenance bay was thick with the smell of burnt circuits, desperation, and the kind of camaraderie that only forms when facing imminent death together. Jackson Thorne stood like a maestro conducting a symphony of chaos, barking orders, and occasionally peering into the abyss of the malfunctioning console, as if it might suddenly reveal the secrets of the universe, or at least how to keep them alive for another day. All right, folks, Jackson said, his voice echoing with the confidence of a man who'd already accepted his own demise but figured he might as well make it entertaining. This is it. We're launching a strategic counterattack. Strategic, Callum snorted from his corner, where he was busy pretending to recalibrate a power conduit. That's a fancy word for winging it, isn't it? Call it what you like, Jackson replied with a shrug. But if it gets us through the day, I'll be sure to add it to my resume. Sierra was still glued to the life support system, which had developed the unfortunate habit of wheezing like an asthmatic at a marathon. And what about the life support? You know, the thing keeping us from becoming space popsicles. That's where you come in, Sierra. Jackson's smile was more grimace than grin. We need to stabilize it long enough to implement the patch. Great, Sierra muttered, her fingers flying over the controls with a speed that suggested she knew time was not on their side. The things I do for job security. Fenn, hunched over the console with all the enthusiasm of someone defusing a bomb blindfolded, spoke up. I've managed to isolate the nanotech's primary interface. We should be able to feed it the new code. Should, Lyra echoed, her eyes still darting between her beloved tablet and the console, as if sheer willpower could make the technology cooperate. That's not reassuring, Fen. Hey, I'm not the one who flirted with an alien language, Fen shot back, his usual sarcasm tinged with a hint of genuine concern. I'm just the guy trying to make it listen. Lyra smirked, not missing a beat. And I'm the girl trying to make it fall in love. Let's just hope it's not the kind of love that ends in a restraining order, Callum chimed in, earning a chuckle from the group. Jackson took a deep breath, more out of habit than necessity given the circumstances. Okay, everyone knows their roles. We're outmanned and outgunned, but damned if we're going down without a fight. Typical human arrogance, Sierra commented dryly. But I guess it's our best feature. And probably our worst, Lyra added, her focus still split between decoding and disaster management. Enough with the inspirational quotes, Jackson said, clapping his hands together for emphasis. Let's save our asses. The team moved with the kind of coordinated chaos that only comes from sheer necessity. Fen typed furiously, connecting wires and rerouting circuits like a mad scientist on the brink of a breakthrough or a breakdown. The console flickered, the alien script dancing across the screen like a taunt. All right, Fen announced, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. We're ready to upload the new code. Hit it, Jackson ordered, his tone brooking no argument. Fen pressed the final key, and for a moment the world held its breath. The console responded with an electronic hum, the alien script melting into something recognizable, something human. It was like watching a peace treaty being signed in real time, assuming the peace treaty was written in Latin and negotiated with a sentient swarm of microscopic machines. Anything? Jackson asked, his eyes fixed on the screen as though it might sprout wings and fly away. I'm not sure, Fen replied, his face a mask of concentration. It's thinking about it. Great, we're on the edge of extinction and we're waiting for an alien system to mull it over, Callum quipped, crossing his arms with the kind of lazy defiance that only a gambler could muster. Patience, dear Callum, Lyra said, her voice laced with humor. It's not like we're in a hurry or anything. The console beeped, a sound that was far too cheerful given the circumstances. A new message scrolled across the screen, half alien script, half Latin. It says, Lyra began, squinting at the text, it says it's willing to parley. Parley? Sierra echoed, her skepticism palpable. Like we're pirates negotiating over buried treasure. Close enough, Fen said, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Except the treasure is our continued existence. So what's the plan? Callum asked, looking to Jackson with the kind of trust usually reserved for cult leaders or really persuasive salesmen. We negotiate, Jackson said, his voice hard as steel. We show them what we're made of, that we're not just some cosmic punchline. Cosmic punchline, Sierra snorted. I feel more like a cosmic joke gone wrong. Well, let's hope whoever's listening has a sense of humor, Lyra said, tapping away at her tablet with renewed vigor. As they worked, the atmosphere shifted from one of impending doom to something more akin to cautious optimism. They were no strangers to long odds, and if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was defying the inevitable. Okay, Fen said, breaking the silence once more. The nanotech has agreed to a ceasefire, but it wants us to prove our worth. Prove our worth, Sierra shook her head. What do they want, a talent show? More like a tech show, Lyra corrected, her eyes never leaving the screen. If we can stabilize the power grid, they'll consider letting us live. Well, that's encouraging, Callum said, sarcasm dripping from his words. Fail and die, succeed and maybe die later. It's the maybe that keeps us going, Jackson said, his eyes meeting Callum's with a steely resolve. Let's get to it. With newfound purpose, the team rallied, each of them tackling their individual tasks with a zeal born of necessity. Sierra managed the life support systems, coaxing them into a semblance of stability. Fen danced between consoles, his fingers a blur as he rerouted power and reprogrammed circuits. Lyra continued her dialogue with the nanotech, typing out messages that walked the fine line between negotiation and flattery. Hours passed, the emergency lights casting a steady glow over their determined faces. They were fighting a war not with weapons but with wit and sheer human stubbornness. It was a battle for survival against a foe that didn't feel anger or mercy, only cold logic. Finally, Fen let out a triumphant cry. "Got it, the power grid's stable. Life supports holding," Sierra added, a small smile breaking through her usual skepticism. Lyra looked up from her tablet, triumph in her eyes. "We've shown them what we're capable of. They are impressed. Impressed enough to let us live?" Callum asked, his voice a mix of hope and disbelief. "It seems that way," Lyra replied, her tone cautious but optimistic. "They appreciate our resilience." "Typical aliens," Jackson said with a wry grin. "Think we're fascinating until we mess up their systems." With the immediate threat averted, the team finally allowed themselves a moment of relief. The tension that had gripped them like a vice began to ease, replaced by the kind of weary satisfaction that comes from narrowly avoiding disaster. "Does this mean we won?" Sierra asked, her voice carrying a hint of disbelief. "We bought ourselves time," Jackson corrected, ever the realist. "The fight's not over, but we've got a fighting chance. And that's all we need," Fen said, his voice carrying a note of pride for the first time. "Well, I don't know about you," Callum said, stretching his arms above his head, "but I think I deserve a nap." "A nap sounds about right," Lyra agreed, her exhaustion finally catching up with her. As the team began to disperse, the weight of their accomplishment settled over them like a comforting blanket. They'd faced insurmountable odds and come out the other side, bruised, battered, but unbroken. "Let's call it a day," Jackson said with a nod. "We've earned it." With that, the team slowly made their way out of the maintenance bay, each of them carrying the scars of battle in their own way. They'd fought for their survival with every ounce of ingenuity they possessed, and for now, that was enough. Jackson lingered a moment longer, his eyes sweeping over the consoles, the blinking lights, the faint hum of machinery that had become their lifeline. They'd claimed a victory today, however small, and in the grand scheme of things, that was all that mattered. He turned to leave, a small smile playing on his lips. The battle might not be over, but they'd proven themselves capable of facing whatever came next. And as far as Jackson was concerned, that was more than enough reason to keep fighting. The air in the maintenance bay was thick with the acrid smell of burnt circuits, a scent that had become as familiar as the taste of dehydrated potatoes. Jackson Thorne stood at the center, surveying the chaos that had become their normal. The hum of the machinery was oddly comforting now, like a lullaby for the damned. "Well," he said, breaking the silence, "we didn't die today. That's a win in my book." Callum leaned against a stack of crates, arms crossed, his perpetual smirk in place. "Yeah, but the day's not over yet." "Always the optimist," Sierra chimed in, still fiddling with the life support system, which was currently engaging in its best impression of a dying walrus. "I'm getting real tired of this thing's death rattle." "It's not that bad," Fen piped up from his position hunched over the console. "Think of it as music, just avant-garde, more like an assault on my senses," Sierra replied, shaking her head. "But at least we won't be popsicles anytime soon." "Not unless we screw up again," Lyra added, eyes glued to her tablet as she sifted through what was left of the archives. "I've got bad news, though. Looks like a good chunk of our historical data's gone, thanks to our uninvited guests." "Aliens," Jackson muttered, "the universe's worst houseguests. They show up unannounced, mess with your stuff, and never clean up after themselves." "At least they didn't eat us," Callum pointed out, always one to find the silver lining, even if it was more like tarnished brass. "Yet," Lyra corrected, pushing her glasses up her nose. "They might still develop a taste for snarky humans. We're an acquired taste," Fen said with a shrug, "like bitter coffee or existential dread." Jackson clapped his hands together, drawing the group's focus back. "All right, enough chit-chat. We've got a colony to rebuild. Let's start with what we can salvage from the data. Most of it's scrambled, like someone put our entire history through a blender," Lyra said, gesturing to the jumbled mess on her screen. "Did you check the backups?" Finn asked, a spark of hope in his voice. "Backups?" Callum let out a bark of laughter. "You mean the ones our friendly neighborhood nanotech decided to chew on for breakfast?" "Yeah, those," Lyra replied, her tone dry as Mars' surface. "Guess we're starting from scratch," Sierra said, not sounding particularly thrilled at the prospect. Jackson nodded, a resigned expression on his face. "Then let's get started. We've got a lot of rewriting to do." "And if there's one thing humans are good at, it's rewriting history." "You mean lying to ourselves," Callum said with a grin. "Call it artistic license," Jackson replied, smiling despite himself. "First order of business, we need to document everything we remember, every detail no matter how small." "Sounds thrilling," Fenn said sarcastically, though he was already setting up a console to begin the process. "Think of it as therapy," Sierra said, her fingers still dancing over the life support controls. "Without the couch and exorbitant fees." "Or the awkward small talk," Callum added. Lyra sighed, glancing at the others. "I'll handle the technical jargon. You guys focus on the heroic last stands and epic struggles." "More like bumbling through disaster," Jackson corrected. "But sure, let's make ourselves look good. Future generations might appreciate the embellishment." The team set to work, the atmosphere a mix of determination and reluctant acceptance. They were survivors first, historians second, but they understood the importance of their task. The aliens might have messed with their systems, but they couldn't touch the memories locked inside their stubbornly human skulls. As hours dragged on, Jackson found himself reflecting on the events that had brought them to this point. They'd faced down alien tech and come out the other side with their skins intact, albeit singed. "You know," he said aloud, breaking the silence, "we might just be the most stubborn creatures in the universe." "Stubborn?" Callum scoffed. "Jackson, we're the cockroaches of the cosmos. You can't kill us, just annoy us." "Comforting thought," Sierra said dryly, "considering our history just got turned into confetti." "Speaking of," Lyra interjected, "I've managed to salvage some of the data. It's not much, but it's a start." "Good work," Jackson praised, genuinely impressed. "We might just pull this off yet." "Don't get too cocky," Fenn warned, typing furiously. "We've still got a long way to go. And who knows when our alien friends will come knocking again," Sierra added. "Maybe they'll send a fruit basket next time," Callum joked. "You know, as an apology." "More like a sorry we nearly wiped your existence basket," Lyra replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "All right, enough with the comedy Ior," Jackson said, though the humor had lightened the mood considerably. "Let's get back to work. We've got a colony to save and a history to rewrite." The team plunged back into their tasks, the seriousness of their mission tempered by the camaraderie that had seen them through darker days. It was a peculiar kind of therapy, this rewriting and rebuilding. Each keystroke, each memory recalled, was a testament to their resilience. As the Ior slipped by, the maintenance bay echoed with the sound of clicking keys and the quiet murmurs of shared memories. They were rebuilding more than just data, they were forging a future, one stubborn keystroke at a time. "Hey," Fenn's voice broke the quiet, "I just had a thought." "Careful, those are dangerous," Callum quipped, but there was genuine curiosity in his eyes. "What if," Fenn continued, undeterred, "we create a backup for the backup? Something offline, something they can't touch." "A hard copy," Sierra suggested, eyebrows raised. "What is this, the 21st century?" "Hey, sometimes old school works," Jackson said, liking the idea. "We could use physical records, keep them in a secure location." "Like a time capsule," Lyra mused. "Except one we hope never to open." "It's not a bad plan," Callum admitted, surprising everyone with his agreement. "Might be nice to have something tangible. You know, in case our digital friends decide to pay another visit." The idea gained traction quickly, the team grasping at it like a lifeline. There was something comforting about the thought of physical records, untouched by the whims of alien technology. "All right," Jackson said, energized by their progress. "Let's make it happen. We'll start with the essentials, then work our way out. As they set to work, a sense of purpose infused their efforts. This was more than just survival. It was a renewal, a chance to ensure that their story didn't end in a garbled mess of alien interference. The hours stretched into a blur, interrupted only by the occasional sarcastic comment or shared laugh. They'd faced extinction and emerged victorious, and they weren't about to let their hard-earned knowledge slip through their fingers. Finally, Jackson called a halt, stepping back to survey their progress. "Not bad for a day's work," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. "We're not done yet," Lyra reminded him, though there was satisfaction in her eyes. "No," Jackson agreed, "but we've got a fighting chance, and that's more than we had yesterday." "Here's to fighting chances," Callum said, raising an imaginary glass in a mock toast. "May we always find a way to screw them up," Sierra added with a grin. "Or at least make them interesting," Fenn said, leaning back in his chair, exhaustion etched into his features. They laughed, the sound carrying through the maintenance bay like a beacon of defiance against the quiet that followed. It was a sound filled with more than just humor. It was resilience, hope, the indomitable spirit that had seen them through to this moment. Jackson took a moment to look around at his team, his friends. They were a motley crew held together by sheer force of will and mutual necessity, but they'd done it. They'd faced down a threat that would have crumbled lesser people and come out the other side, scarred but standing. "So," Sierra said, breaking into his thoughts, "what's next, fearless leader?" Jackson considered the question, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "We keep going," he said simply. "We rebuild, we relearn, we prepare, and when the next challenge comes, we'll be ready." "Damn right," Callum said, a fierce light in his eyes. "Here's to tomorrow," Lyra said, her voice holding a note of optimism that hadn't been there before. "Here's to us," Fenn added, a rare note of sentiment in his usually sardonic tone. "Here's to surviving another day," Jackson finished, the weight of the words settling comfortably over his shoulders. They didn't know what the future held, but they were ready to face it, armed with nothing more than their wits, their stubbornness, and a grudgingly earned camaraderie. They were human, imperfect, and flawed, but that was their greatest strength. As they left the maintenance bay, Jackson glanced back one last time, a small smile on his lips. They'd rebuilt more than just data today. They'd rebuilt themselves, and that was the greatest victory of all.